Hold her down. Rourke's voice was ice cold as 5 men closed in around her in the darkness. He grabbed Maya by the collar and slammed her against the wall hard enough to crack the concrete behind her head. You think you can come into my facility and take me down? He laughed inches from her face, hand tightening around her throat. You're nobody. You're nothing. The 5 men moved in. She let them get close, let them put their hands on her. Then something shifted behind her eyes, something ancient and trained and absolutely lethal. And she said, barely above a whisper, last warning. They didn't listen. Nobody ever does. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning she arrived, the desert was already angry. Heat shimmered off the asphalt in long, lazy waves, distorting the air above the training yard like something out of a fever dream. The Joint Tactical Training Facility sat in the middle of nowhere 40 miles from the nearest city, surrounded by nothing but red rock, open sky, and the kind of silence that makes men feel big. It was the kind of place where the military sent people to be broken down and rebuilt, where careers were made or ended in the span of a single week. Nobody paid attention to the woman who stepped off the transport vehicle at 0600. She wore no rank insignia, carried a single duffel bag, said nothing to the driver, nothing to the checkpoint officer, nothing to the handful of trainees already milling around the entrance gate waiting for morning formation. She just walked steady, unhurried, each step placed with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked through far worse places than this. Her name on the intake roster read Carter M. Civilian Contractor. Support personnel. That's what the paper said. And in a place full of men who believed everything on paper, that was all they needed to know. Sergeant Dale Rourke saw her first. He was standing near the equipment shed with 2 of his guys, Corporal Hicks and a thick-necked former college linebacker. Everyone called Boomer when the transport pulled in. Rourke was the kind of man who took up space on purpose. Broad shoulders, a jaw like a concrete block, and the permanent expression of someone waiting to be offended. He had 3 tours in Afghanistan, a wall full of commendations, and an unshakable belief that the training yard was his kingdom. He watched the woman walk through the gate and felt something he couldn't quite name. Not attraction, not interest, something closer to irritation. Like a fly that had wandered into a room where flies didn't belong. The hell is that? Boomer muttered, squinting. Contractor, Hicks said, reading from his tablet. Carter, support staff. Rourke snorted. Support staff. He said it the way some people say the word mistake. Slow, deliberate, like he was tasting how wrong it sounded. They're sending us support staff now. Wonderful, that's just wonderful. Maya Carter didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She had already clocked every man in her peripheral vision the moment she stepped through the gate. Their positions, their body language, the specific way Rourke was standing, that told her everything about who he was and what he was going to do next. She had been reading rooms like this one since she was 22 years old. Since a recruiter had looked her dead in the face and said the words that changed everything. You don't belong here either, sweetheart. And she had proven him wrong in ways that eventually got classified. She walked past them without slowing down. Rourke called after her. Hey, Carter. She kept walking. Carter. His voice dropped into that particular register that men like Rourke used when they wanted to remind you who held the power in a room. I'm talking to you. She stopped, but she didn't turn around immediately. She let exactly 3 seconds pass, not out of rudeness, but because 3 seconds was the amount of time it took to assess whether a situation required engagement or dismissal. In this case, the answer was clear, but protocol was protocol. She turned. Sergeant, she said. Rourke walked toward her, slowly, hands in his pockets. The walk of a man who had never once in his adult life felt physically outmatched. Hicks and Boomer trailed behind him like planets orbiting a particularly unpleasant sun. You sure you're in the right place, Rourke said. He looked her up and down, not suggestively, but assessingly, the way you might look at a tool that someone had left in the wrong drawer. This is a tactical training facility, not a supply depot. I'm aware, Maya said. Civilian support staff doesn't usually come through the main gate. I did today. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Something about her voice bothered him. It was too flat, too controlled. Most people, civilian contractors especially, softened when he used that tone. They apologized, explained themselves, got nervous. She did none of those things. She just looked at him with calm, dark eyes and waited. What exactly is your support role, Carter? That's above your clearance level, Sergeant. The yard went quiet. Boomer actually took half a step back. Hicks blinked. Rourke's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to hearing that sentence from someone who looked the way she looked, average height, lean build, not a single visible marker of rank or authority. In his world, clearance level was something that got name-dropped by officers with eagles on their collars, not contractors carrying duffel bags. He laughed. It was not a pleasant laugh. Lady, I've been here 12 years. There's nothing that happens in this facility that's above my level. Maya looked at him for one long, steady moment. Then she said simply, walk away now. And Rourke, for just a fraction of a second, hesitated. It was tiny, barely perceptible, but she saw it. She always saw it. That brief involuntary pause that the body makes when something in the deep animal brain registers a warning signal that the conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. His body knew something his ego didn't. Then his ego won. He laughed again, louder this time, and turned back to Hicks and Boomer with his arms spread wide. Did you hear that? Walk away now? He mimicked her flat tone with exaggerated precision. That's cute. That is genuinely cute. Hicks laughed. Boomer laughed. Across the yard, two other trainees who had been watching from a distance started laughing. Maya picked up her bag and walked to the barracks without another word. Behind her, Rourke called out, "Welcome to the facility support staff." He was still laughing when she rounded the corner. She was not. She was already calculating. The barracks assigned to her were at the far end of the compound, separate from the main trainee quarters. Standard placement for support personnel, out of the way, out of sight. The room was small, a cot, a footlocker, a single light bulb overhead. She had slept in worse places. She had slept in places so much worse that this room felt like a resort. She set her bag down on the cot and unzipped it carefully. Inside, beneath a standard-issue change of clothes and a battered water bottle, was a compact folder sealed with a code that only she knew. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She had memorized every page the moment she received it. Old habit. When you operate in environments where paper can get you killed, you learn to carry everything in your head and nothing in your hands. The assignment was simple, at least on the surface. Observe, assess, report. She had been sent here because someone somewhere in a building without windows had noticed irregularities in the training program. Trainees washing out at unusual rates. Equipment failing in statistically improbable patterns. Financial inconsistencies buried so deep in the logistics chain that only someone who knew exactly what they were looking for would ever find them. The kind of thing that in her experience meant one of two things: incompetence or corruption. And in her experience, it was almost never incompetence. She was not here as a trainee. She was not here as a contractor. She was here as something that had no official title, something that operated in the space between what governments admitted they did and what they actually did. A function, a capability, a person-shaped solution to a problem that couldn't be acknowledged in any official document. She had been this for years. It had cost her everything. She sat on the edge of the cot and let herself have 60 seconds. She had learned this discipline in a windowless room in Mosul from a man whose name she was never allowed to know, who had told her that the mind was like a muscle. It needed brief, deliberate rest to perform at maximum capacity. 60 seconds, no longer. Then back to work. She used 50 of those seconds thinking about Rourke. He was the wrong kind of problem, not the kind she was here to solve, but the kind that had a habit of making problems worse. She had met men like him on every continent, men who had confused status with competence, volume with authority, and fear-inspiring with respect-earning. They were predictable. They were dangerous not because they were capable, but because they were reckless, because men who never felt threatened tended to create situations where someone eventually got hurt. She hoped he would let it go. She suspected he wouldn't. On the 51st second, she stood up and started planning her first day. Morning formation at 06:30 was exactly what she expected and exactly what she needed. Standing in the back row observing, she began building her map of the facility in her mind. Not the physical layout, which she had already committed to memory from the briefing documents, but the social one. The invisible architecture of power and resentment in alliance that existed in every military environment. The commanding officer on deck was a lieutenant colonel named Hargrove, tall silver-haired, the posture of a man who had been in uniform since before some of these trainees were born. He ran the formation with crisp efficiency, no wasted words, no theatrics. The kind of officer who had earned his authority the slow, hard way and wore it quietly. Rourke stood at the front of his unit. The body language between him and Hargrove was interesting, slightly too much distance, the colonel's eyes moving past Rourke rather than resting on him. Something there, not open hostility, something more like deliberate disregard. She filed it away. Then there was Specialist Torres, female, mid-20s, standing third from the left in the front row with the contained stillness of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. There was a bruise along her jaw, fresh maybe 18 hours old, and she was angled slightly away from the two men standing on either side of her. When Rourke walked past during the roll call, her whole body tensed. Maya watched her for the rest of formation and thought, there it is. That's the place where the irregularities live. After dismissal, she moved. Not toward Torres, not yet. Too obvious, too fast. Instead, she drifted toward the equipment shed, where 3 trainees were checking out gear for the morning's obstacle course drill. She moved among them like water, listening. They talked freely around her. Support staff were furniture. Furniture didn't report. Rourke's doing evaluation scores again. One of them was saying, a young man sharp-eyed from Georgia based on his vowels. You know what that means? Means whoever he doesn't like fails, the second one said. Flat, certain, like it was a fact of weather. Torres already failed communications eval twice. Both times Rourke was the scoring officer. Third failure and she's out. Yeah, a pause. It's wrong, man. It's wrong, the first one agreed. But what are you going to do? They took their gear and left. Maya stood still for a moment in the shadow of the shed and thought, now I know what I'm here for. The obstacle course was brutal by design and more brutal in execution. 12-foot walls, barbed wire, crawls cargo nets over pits filled with what smelled optimistically like mud. The trainees moved through it in waves. Maya was assigned to observe and log times, a clerical function that put her exactly where she needed to be, which was everywhere at once. Rourke was running the course alongside the trainees. This surprised her marginally. Most senior NCOs supervised from the sidelines. He was in the pit with them, pushing shouting hands on in a way that could look like leadership or could look like something else depending on the angle. She watched his angle carefully. It was the third wave when it happened. Torres hit the rope climb, 40 feet military-grade rope. Wet from a water obstacle she just completed, and started up with the focused, determined energy of someone who had something to prove. She was good. Her form was solid, her pace was controlled, and she was on track to log one of the faster times in her group. Then Rourke appeared at the base of the rope. He didn't touch anything. He didn't touch her. He just stood directly below her and started talking in that low, specific voice, not loud enough for the official observer to hear clearly across the yard, but perfectly audible to Torres on the rope. Maya watched Torres's grip falter, watched her lose her rhythm, watched her slide 18 inches before catching herself, arms shaking. She came down 3 feet short of the top. Failed mark. Rourke walked away from the base of the rope and made a small notation on his clipboard without expression. Maya wrote her own notation and kept her face completely still. That evening, she found Torres alone near the water station on the east side of the yard. Maya filled her own bottle, said nothing for a moment, then, "That rope climb this morning. Your upper body form was correct. The failure wasn't technique." Torres stiffened. "I know that. I know you know that." Silence. Torres looked at her sideways, this quiet woman who everyone said was just support staff, but who stood like something else entirely. "Who are you?" "I'm here to log times," Maya said. Torres searched her face. Whatever she saw there or whatever she didn't see, meaning fear, meaning judgment, meaning pity, seemed to make a decision for her. "He does it every time," she said, voice low and tight. "Every single time I'm about to hit a benchmark, like clockwork. Every time. And when you report it, he's a sergeant with 12 years and 2 unit commendations. I'm a specialist with a 3-month record and no allies." She said it without self-pity, just the flat mathematics of how power worked. "You do the math." "I'm doing it," Maya said. Torres looked at her again. "What does that mean?" Maya capped her water bottle. "It means someone is doing the math. She walked away, and Torres stood at the water station for a long moment staring at the space where the quiet contractor woman had been trying to figure out why she suddenly felt for the first time in weeks like she wasn't completely alone. 3 days in Rourke escalated. It was subtle at first, the kind of subtle that people who weren't paying attention would miss entirely. Her gear kept ending up in the wrong place, not missing, just moved. Relocated in ways that cost time, created friction, made her mornings harder without being provable. She would find her logbooks on the wrong shelf. Her access badge would be returned each morning with a scratch on the magnetic strip that sometimes required 2 swipes, never 3. Never enough to constitute a real malfunction, but always enough to slow her down by a minute at gate checkpoints. Small, petty, precise. She documented every single instance. On the 4th day, she arrived at the equipment shed to find her workstation had been rearranged. All her observational equipment shifted to face away from the obstacle course toward the perimeter fence, instead rendering her logging position essentially useless. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the rearranged equipment, felt the familiar pressure of the calculation respond or absorb, escalate or endure. In her experience, both had their place, and the art was in knowing which situation called for which approach. She moved her equipment back to its original position, precisely, without commentary. 15 minutes later, Hicks appeared in the doorway. He was trying to look casual, which meant he was anything but. "Hey, someone must have moved your stuff. Sorry about that." "Did they?" Maya said, not looking up from her log. "Yeah, probably just a mix-up." "Probably." He hovered for a moment, waiting for her to react in some way that he could report back. She gave him nothing. He left. She heard him on the phone 20 seconds later outside the shed. "She just put it back. Didn't say a word." A pause. "I know, man. I know. It's weird." She allowed herself the smallest, most private satisfaction. Let them find the silence unsettling. Silence, she had learned, was the most powerful thing she carried. Not her training, not her record, not the things she could do with her hands in 2 seconds flat. Silence. Because silence made people nervous. Nervous people made mistakes. And mistakes were information. The inflection point came on the 5th evening during the navigation exercise. Navigation was conducted at dusk trainees in teams of 4 oriented only by topographic map and magnetic compass, required to locate 5 checkpoint markers across a 2-mile course through broken terrain. No GPS, no electronics, no radios. The exercise was partly about navigation and mostly about how people behaved when they were disoriented, physically exhausted, and in the dark. Maya had been cleared to observe the exercise from the mobile command station, a reinforced trailer parked at the course's edge, staffed by 2 junior officers who were almost comically uninterested in the quiet support contractor sitting in the corner with her logbook. She had positioned herself near the window that faced the course's northeastern quadrant, the quarter where 3 of the 5 checkpoints were located, the quarter where Torres was navigating. For the first 40 minutes, everything ran normally. She tracked the movement of the teams across the course, noted the timestamps kept her log current. The 2 junior officers drank bad coffee and talked about a ball game. Then Torres's team stopped moving. Maya looked up from her log. Through the window, she could see barely in the failing light a cluster of figures near the base of a rocky outcrop. Too many figures. Torres's team had 4. There were at least 8. She put her logbook down. One of the junior officers noticed. "Something wrong." "Northeast sector," Maya said. "Team 4. Can you put eyes on them with the monitoring camera?" The officer leaned forward, punched up the camera feed. The image was grainy, the light was almost gone, but clear enough. Rourke's team was not supposed to be in the northeast quadrant. Their designated route was southwest. They had no legitimate reason to be standing between Torres and the next checkpoint marker, 4 of them arranged in a loose semicircle, with body language that even through a grainy camera was unmistakable. The junior officer frowned. "That's... Sergeant Rourke is off his designated route," Maya said. Her voice was perfectly even. "That should be in the log." "Right." He wrote it down. "I'll radio Sergeant." "Don't," Maya said. He looked at her. "Log it first. Document the time, the GPS coordinates, the observable body language. Then radio." She met his eyes. "The sequence matters." He stared at her for a moment, this support contractor who was telling him how to do his job, and something in her expression made him not argue. He logged it all exactly as she said with timestamps. Then he radioed. By the time the radio call reached the chorus, Supervisor Rourke's group had already dispersed back toward their designated route. Torres's team completed the exercise 17 minutes late, which officially counted as a failing time. Torres logged her third consecutive sub-benchmark result. One more and she was out of the program. Maya sat in the mobile command station for a long time after the teams came in. Long enough for the two junior officers to leave for dinner. Long enough for the trailer to go quiet around her. Then she opened her folder, the one with the code she never wrote down, and began writing in her precise, minimal hand. Pattern confirmed. Systemic. Deliberate. One officer. Multiple victims. Infrastructure of fear established over extended period. Recommend immediate escalation. She paused. Then she added one more line. Personal risk to documenting officer increasing. Recommend expedited timeline. She sealed the folder, placed it back at the bottom of her duffel bag beneath the water bottle and the change of clothes. Then she sat for one more moment in the quiet trailer and let herself feel it, the thing she usually didn't allow. Not anger, something more complicated than anger. The exhaustion of a person who had spent years watching the wrong people hold power and the right people absorb damage, and who had gotten very good at fixing the math, but who sometimes in quiet trailers in the dark wondered what it had cost her to become the kind of person who could fix it this way. 60 seconds. Then she stood up. There was still tomorrow. And tomorrow she suspected it was going to be when Rourke decided that subtle wasn't working anymore. She was right. The next morning she found her access badge missing entirely. Not scratched, not misplaced, gone. Without an access badge, she couldn't enter the main facility buildings, which meant she couldn't log the morning evaluations, which meant there was a gap in her documentation, which was almost certainly the point. Someone wanted a gap. She went to the administrative office. The duty clerk, young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable, told her that her badge had been deactivated due to a system error and that reissuing would take at least 48 hours to process. 48 hours, Maya repeated. Yes, ma'am. Sorry about that. She looked at him. He had the specific body language of someone who had been told to say exactly those words and was hoping very hard that she would accept them and then leave. His left hand was slightly trembling. Who filed the deactivation request? She asked. It was a system. Who filed the physical request? There's a paper form. Someone signed it. The clerk's eyes moved involuntarily, just a flicker, a half-second reflex toward a specific drawer on the left side of his desk. I can't disclose. You don't need to, Maya said. I can see where you're looking. She left before he could respond, but she had what she needed. The drawer, the form, the signature, all of it documented now in her memory with the same precision as everything else. When this was done, the paper trail would be complete enough to end careers. She was going to make sure of it. She operated without the badge for the rest of the morning by positioning herself outside the building lines, technically in her authorized observation zone, which extended to the outer edge of the training yard. Less access, but she could still see. She could always still see. It was during the afternoon hand-to-hand combat evaluation that Rourke made his first direct move. The evaluation was conducted in a large open-air space at the center of the facility, a flat, hard-packed area surrounded on 3 sides by equipment storage and on the 4th by the main building wall. Trainees cycled through in pairs, evaluated on technique, control, and response to resistance. Maya was observing from the perimeter, the only place her unauthorized but technically valid position allowed. Rourke walked directly up to her. Not the casual walk of someone crossing a yard, a deliberate walk, straight line, stopping close enough that she would have to step back or stand her ground. She stood her ground. You're out of position, he said. My badge is being reprocessed, she said. I'm within my authorized observation perimeter. This area is restricted during live evaluation. The restriction zone ends at the equipment line. I'm 6 feet outside the equipment line. He leaned slightly forward, close enough now that she could see the specific tension in his jaw, not anger, something more calculated than anger. He was doing this on purpose, waiting to see if she'd step back. She didn't. You know what I think, he said, dropping his voice low. I think you're not what you say you are. I think you're someone's project. Some oversight audit that somebody thought was going to come in here quietly and poke around without anyone noticing. His eyes were hard. We notice. Maya said nothing. And I think, he continued, that whoever sent you doesn't fully understand how this facility works. Who runs things here? What happens to people who poke around where they're not welcome? He paused, let that sit. You understand what I'm saying? She looked at him for a long, measured moment. The evaluation continued behind him, trainees grappling instructors, calling corrections, and the whole world seemed to contract to this 6-foot stretch of hard-packed dirt between them. I understand exactly what you're saying, Sergeant, she said. Good. Do you understand what I'm saying? He frowned slightly. You haven't said anything. Exactly, Maya said, and she went back to writing in her logbook. Rourke stood where he was for a full 5 seconds. She could feel his confusion without looking up the disorientation of a man who knew how to read aggression and fear, but had never learned how to read this. She had been this. She had learned to be this in places that had tested it in ways that would have destroyed most people. He had no framework for it. He walked away. She kept writing, but her hand, for just a moment, was absolutely still on the page. Not from fear, from the recognition of the things she had felt before in other places. The moment before violence, the stillness in the air that preceded the storm. She had felt it enough times to know Rourke had moved past calculated harassment. He had moved into something else, something that was going to require a different response. She was going to have to be ready, and she was. She had been ready since the moment she got off the transport vehicle. She had been ready since Mosul. She had been ready since before this man had ever put on a uniform. The question was never whether she was ready. The question was always, would they give her a choice about when? Her pen moved again, precise and unhurried. And she kept writing. She slept 4 hours that night, not because she couldn't sleep more. She could control that, had learned to control it, the same way she had learned to control everything else, but because 4 hours was all the situation allowed. She was up at 0200, sitting on the edge of her cot in the dark, running through everything she had documented in the past 5 days with the focused precision of a machine that didn't know how to stop. The badge deactivation, the gear relocation, the navigation exercise interference, Rourke's deliberate positioning during Torres' rope climb, the clerk's involuntary eye movement toward the drawer, the paper form, the signature she hadn't seen but knew existed. And now this, the confrontation at the evaluation area, the threat that wasn't quite a threat, the hand that hadn't quite touched her, the line that hadn't quite been crossed. She knew what came next. She had seen this pattern before in places far more dangerous than a desert training facility. When a man like Rourke decided that subtle wasn't working, he didn't retreat. He escalated. The only question was how fast and how far, and whether she would have everything she needed before he made his move. She pulled out her folder and added 3 more entries by the thin beam of her flashlight. Precise, time-stamped, unemotional. Then she put it away, lay back on the cot, and closed her eyes. She was ready. She had been ready. She just needed him to commit. He committed the very next morning. At 05:30 before formation, she went to the supply room to collect her reassigned observation equipment. The room was supposed to be staffed by a duty private at that hour. Instead, she found Hicks. He was standing next to her equipment locker with his arms crossed and the specific expression of someone who had been rehearsing what to say. Supply rooms restricted until 700 now, he said. New order. Maya looked at him steadily. When was that order issued? Last night. Who issued it? Sergeant Rourke, acting in his capacity as senior NCO of record for morning operations. He said it like he was reading from a card. Maybe he was. If you have a problem with it, you can file a formal grievance with admin. She looked at him for a long moment. Not at his eyes, at his hands. They were tight, slightly elevated. He was braced for her to argue, to raise her voice, to give him the reaction he had been sent here to provoke and document. She didn't give it to him. Thank you, Corporal, she said. I'll note the access change in my log. She turned and walked out. Behind her, she heard him exhale the specific sound of a man who had been expecting a fight and didn't know what to do with the absence of one. She was already 3 steps down the corridor and moving fast. She had exactly 90 minutes before formation. She used them. The facility's administrative building had a secondary entrance on the east side that was technically accessible to all personnel during off hours, a provision that existed for duty officers and medical staff who needed building access outside normal hours. The provision had never been formally revoked, which meant it was still technically valid, which meant she was technically authorized. She had noted this on day one. She noted most things on day one. The corridor inside was empty. She moved through it quickly, heading for the records office on the second floor. The door was locked, a standard tumbler lock, not electronic, which told her the records office hadn't been upgraded in at least 6 years. She had the door open in 11 seconds. She wasn't proud of this. It was simply a skill the way some people could fix engines or play piano. She happened to be able to do this. Inside, she went directly to the physical personnel files, not the digital system which would log access, but the paper backup that every military facility was required to maintain. She knew exactly what she was looking for. She had known since the moment she watched Torres's grip falter on the rope. She found Torres's file first. Evaluation scores, instructor, comments, formal assessments. She read the numbers with the careful attention of someone who understood not just what the numbers said, but what the space between the numbers meant. Torres's objective performance metrics, physical fitness, weapons qualification, navigation were strong, borderline exceptional. Her instructor-assessed scores, leadership decision-making, composure under pressure were poor. So poor that they dragged her overall rating below the threshold for program continuation. And every single low instructor-assessed score had been entered by Rourke. She pulled 3 more files, 3 more female trainees who had washed out in the past 14 months. Same pattern. Strong objective scores, gutted subjective scores, all under Rourke's evaluation authority. Then she found something she hadn't expected. A financial disbursement record, misfiled between 2 personnel folders, the kind of mistake that happened when someone was moving fast and wasn't careful enough. A transfer of training budget funds to a private logistics contractor. The amount was significant. The contractor's name meant nothing to her on the surface. But the authorization signature at the bottom was not Rourke's. It was Hargrove's. She stood very still in the records office and let that settle. The colonel, the silver-haired officer who had run formation with quiet authority and whom she had cataloged as removed from Rourke's operation. The man who had seemed to regard Rourke with deliberate disregard. That disregard wasn't distance, it was performance. They were connected, and the connection ran deeper than she had estimated, and the entire structure of what she thought she understood about this facility shifted in about 4 seconds. She photographed the disbursement record with the small camera she kept in her breast pocket. Old school film, non-digital, completely undetectable by electronic sweeps, replaced every file exactly as she had found it, and left the building the same way she had entered. She was back in her barracks with 6 minutes to spare before formation. During those 6 minutes, she sat on her cot and did something she almost never allowed herself to do. She recalibrated completely, tore down the map she had been building and rebuilt it from the new information up. Hargrove, Rourke, the contractor, the disbursement, the washed-out female trainees, the irregularities that had sent her here in the first place. It wasn't one corrupt sergeant running a personal campaign of intimidation. It was a managed system, with financial benefit flowing out the other end, requiring a steady supply of washed-out trainees to justify the training budget they were siphoning. And she was now a person who knew too much. The 60 seconds she normally allowed herself for stillness didn't feel like enough. She gave herself 61. Then she stood up and went to formation. Formation that morning felt different. She wasn't sure if it actually was different or if it was the new information changing the filter through which she observed it. Hargrove ran it the same way he always did, crisp, efficient, no wasted motion. But she watched his eyes now, watched where they moved. And 3 times during the 10-minute formation, his gaze passed over her in the back row. Not the absent sweep of a commander doing attendance. Something more deliberate. He knew she'd been in the building. She didn't know how. Electronic sensors, she'd missed a camera, she hadn't clocked a duty officer who'd spotted her and reported quietly up the chain. It didn't matter how. What mattered was the fact of it and what it meant for her timeline. She had planned to spend 2 more days gathering documentation before initiating her extraction protocol. 2 more days was no longer available to her. After formation, Torres fell into step beside her as the group dispersed toward the first training block. It looked accidental. It wasn't. Torres had clearly been waiting for the right moment, and the right moment was apparently now. "I need to tell you something," Torres said, keeping her voice low and her eyes forward. Walk with me, Maya said. Normal pace. They walked toward the equipment shed like two people with somewhere to be. Last night, Torres said, after the navigation exercise, Rourke pulled my team lead aside. Private conversation 20 minutes. This morning my team lead won't look at me. Her jaw was tight. I don't know what he said, but I know it wasn't good. Your team lead's name, Specialist Garrett. He was a solid guy. Good. We had a rapport. This morning he acted like I was a stranger. She paused. Like I was something he needed to stay away from. Maya absorbed this. Rourke was cutting Torres's support system, isolating her, making sure that when the next fabricated evaluation failure came, there would be nobody to corroborate her account, nobody who would speak for her. It was methodical, and it told her something important about how far along this was. He wasn't improvising. He had done this before. He knew the steps. Torres, she said, I want you to do something for me. What? Nothing. I want you to do absolutely nothing. Don't confront Garrett. Don't confront Rourke. Don't file anything. Don't request anything. Don't talk to anyone else about any of this. She said it precisely, no softening, because softening would have been disrespectful. Can you do that? Torres looked at her. For how long? 48 hours. A pause. That's how long it takes to process a badge reissue, too. Maya looked at her sideways. Torres was sharp. Sharper than Rourke had apparently given her credit for, which was probably why she had survived this long. You're paying attention, Maya said. I've been paying attention since the first time he tanked my eval score, Torres said. I just haven't had anyone to pay attention with. She hesitated. Are you actually support staff? Maya said. 48 hours, Torres. Torres nodded. Once. Tight. 48 hours. They separated at the equipment shed and didn't speak again for the rest of the morning. The hand-to-hand training block ran from 0900 to 1130. Maya observed from the perimeter. Rourke ran the block with his usual hands-on intensity, moving among the paired trainees, offering corrections that occasionally looked a great deal like demonstrations of dominance. She logged everything working from memory now that her physical logbook access was restricted. It was 40 minutes into the block when Boomer approached her. He wasn't alone. He had two trainees with him she hadn't formally cataloged yet. Big men, the kind of size that got used as a message before a word was spoken. He stopped in front of her and crossed his arms and gave her the look that men like Boomer gave people when they wanted to communicate that something was about to get difficult. You're in the observation restricted zone, he said. I'm 8 feet outside the restriction line, Maya said. Line moved. When? This morning. I'll need that in writing before I relocate. He stared at her. Lady, I'm not... Corporal, she said quietly, the way she said most things. If the restriction line has been officially moved, there will be a formal notation in the facility operations log. I'll be happy to relocate the moment you show me that notation. Until then, I'm in an authorized observation position and I'm doing my job. She held his eyes. Is there anything else? The two men behind him exchanged a glance. Boomer's jaw moved slightly like he was chewing on something he didn't know how to swallow. She had given him nothing to grab onto, no emotion, no retreat, no aggression, just the immovable, reasonable, completely infuriating fact of her position. He left without another word. She kept observing, but the space between her shoulder blades felt warm in a specific way she had learned to pay attention to, the feeling of being watched, not casually, with intent. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She knew exactly where Rourke was standing. The afternoon brought the close quarters combat evaluation, the one that would count toward Torres's final rating. Maya had known this was coming for 2 days. She had positioned everything she could position in the hours she'd had. The evaluation was supervised by Hargrove himself, which was unusual. Senior officers didn't typically attend individual trainee assessments at this level. He arrived at the evaluation space 10 minutes before it began, accompanied by a junior aide and the facility's official evaluation officer, a Captain Dietrich, by the book, apparently clean someone Maya had been watching carefully and tentatively, placed on the right side of the ledger. Hargrove's presence changed the dynamic in the space immediately. Trainees stood straighter, instructors spoke more carefully. Rourke, she noticed, moved to a position slightly behind and to the left of Hargrove, which told her something about the geometry of their relationship. Rourke as satellite, Hargrove as center, the deference invisible to most people, but not to her. Torres went through the evaluation with ferocious precision. Every technique clean, every transition controlled. Her reaction time in the resistance scenario was among the fastest Maya had seen in 5 days of observation. She was by any objective measure outstanding. Captain Dietrich logged her scores in real time on his tablet. His expression was professionally neutral, but she caught the slight elevation of his eyebrows twice during the evaluation, the involuntary micro-expression of someone seeing performance that exceeded expectation. Then Hargrove leaned toward Rourke and said something very quietly. Maya was 40 feet away. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the shape of them in the movement of his jaw and the slight downward angle of his head, the angle of someone communicating downward to someone below them in the hierarchy, something they wanted done. And she could read Rourke's response in the single fractional nod he gave, the nod of a man who had received a confirmation of something already arranged. 3 minutes later, during Torres's final resistance scenario, Rourke called a form violation. He stepped forward from his position, not his role, not his jurisdiction. In this evaluation, Captain Dietrich was the scoring officer and said in his official voice clearly for the record, form violation specialist Torres, illegal contact, point deduction. He looked at Dietrich. Logged. Dietrich looked up. Something moved behind his eyes, something that looked like discomfort, like the expression of a man who knew he was watching something wrong and was calculating the cost of saying so. The calculation took 2 seconds. Then he looked back at his tablet. Logged, he said. The score dropped, not catastrophically, but enough. Torres finished the evaluation with a rating of satisfactory rather than outstanding, which pushed her cumulative score to just below the continuation threshold. Effectively, she was out of the program. She didn't know it yet. The official notification would come through channels in the next 24 hours. But Maya knew, and watching Torres walk off the evaluation mat with her chin up and her hands loose at her sides, having given everything she had to an evaluation that had already been decided before she stepped onto the mat, something moved in Maya's chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. She had 48 hours. She was going to need 24. She found Dietrich alone in the corridor outside the evaluation space 20 minutes later. He was standing with his back against the wall and his tablet hanging at his side, staring at nothing in particular, with the look of a man having a conversation with himself that wasn't going well. She stopped in front of him. He looked up, saw her. The discomfort in his eyes sharpened into something more specific awareness. He knew what she had seen. He knew she knew. Captain, she said. Contractor, he said carefully. I need 60 seconds of your time. He looked down the corridor both ways. Empty. He looked back at her. I don't think... Captain Dietrich. She said his name with quiet exactness. In the past 3 years, 4 female trainees have been removed from this program using fabricated evaluation failures. You have been present for at least 2 of those removals. You have logged scores that you knew were inaccurate. She let that sit for 1 second. I know this because I have been watching this facility for 5 days and I am very good at what I do. Another second. You have a choice in the next 24 hours. You can be part of the documentation that ends this, or you can be part of what gets documented. Those are the only 2 options available to you. Dietrich stared at her. His face had gone pale. Not from fear or not only from fear. From the specific blanching of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been told that someone could see the weight. Who are you? He said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Someone who is going to fix this, Maya said. But I need the original evaluation logs, not the entered scores. The raw data that came off the assessment sensors before it was manually adjusted. If that data still exists, you know where it is. He was silent for a long moment. She could see him thinking, running the calculation, weighing the risk on both sides, feeling the pressure of a moment that had been coming for longer than he probably wanted to admit. It exists, he finally said. Can you get it to me? Another long silence. You're really going to fix this, he said. Yes. He looked at her for a long time, really looked the way people looked when they were trying to read something true about a person rather than just processing surface information. Whatever he found seemed to settle something in him. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, the physical release of a decision made. The raw data is archived in the assessment system backup server. It auto-archives every 48 hours. If they haven't manually purged it, he stopped, recalculated. The backup window closes at 2200 tonight. Maya checked her internal clock. She had 4 hours and 17 minutes. Thank you, Captain, she said. She was already walking. Behind her, Dietrich said, Carter. She stopped but didn't turn. If this goes wrong, his voice broke slightly on the edge of the sentence. He recovered it. If this goes wrong, I need you to know I've been trying to figure out how to stop this for 8 months. She turned then, just enough to look at him over her shoulder. I know, she said. That's why I came to you. She left him in the corridor and moved quickly toward the facility's technical infrastructure building, the folder in her bag growing heavier with every step. Not physically, but in the way that things grew heavier when they mattered, when the weight of them was the weight of someone's career and someone's freedom and someone's belief that the right people would eventually show up. She was the right people. She had never been entirely sure she deserved to be. But she was here and the clock was running, and 4 hours and 17 minutes now. 4 hours and 14 was enough time if she moved correctly and nothing went wrong. She had never been good at nothing going wrong, but she had always been exceptional at handling it when it did. The technical infrastructure building was staffed at this hour by a single systems technician running overnight server maintenance. She had cataloged him on day 2. His name was Private Okafor, 22 years old, 3 months into his first posting. He had the look of someone who had signed up with genuine idealism and was currently in the process of discovering that idealism and military bureaucracy had an adversarial relationship. She knocked on the open door of the server room. He looked up from his workstation. Private Okafor, she said. I'm Carter, contractor. I need access to the assessment system backup archive. He blinked. Do you have a work order for that? I have authorization from Captain Dietrich, she said. Which was technically true. Dietrich had told her the data existed and where it was, which was as close to authorization as she was going to get in the next 4 hours. I need you to pull the raw assessment data from the past 90 days before the 2200 backup window closes. Okafor looked at her, then he looked at his screen, then he looked at her again. Ma'am, that kind of request usually goes through Lieutenant. Private. She sat down in the chair next to his workstation, calm, unhurried. The energy of someone who had all the time in the world, which was the opposite of true, but was exactly what the situation required. How long have you been at this facility? He blinked at the change of direction. 3 months. In 3 months, have you ever felt like something here wasn't right? A pause. His eyes moved slightly, the involuntary tell of someone who had felt exactly that and had been sitting with it. I don't know what you mean, he said carefully. I think you do, she said. And I think you've been at that workstation long enough to have seen things move through this server that you weren't sure how to categorize. She looked at the server racks behind him. The assessment data. Has anyone asked you to manually purge or modify archived records in the past year? The silence that followed was its own answer. It lasted long enough that it told her everything, and when he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet and very young. Twice, he said. I was told it was routine data hygiene. It wasn't, she said. He looked at his hands, then at the server behind him, then at her. Whoever you really are, he said slowly, you're not support staff. No, she said, I'm not. He turned back to his workstation. His hands moved to the keyboard, then stopped. If I do this, you're protected, she said. I will make sure of that personally. He nodded, a slow, deliberate nod, the nod of a young man making the first genuinely consequential decision of his adult life. Then his hands moved on the keyboard with the speed of someone who knew the system well and had been waiting without knowing it for a reason to use that knowledge for something that mattered. The raw assessment data began pulling to an encrypted drive in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. She sat next to him and watched it happen and thought about Torres walking off the evaluation mat with her chin up and about Dietrich in the corridor holding the weight of 8 months and about the 3 other women whose files she had pulled from the records office. Women who had washed out and been erased from this program before anyone with the right clearance had shown up to count the cost. At 21:47, 13 minutes before the backup window closed, she had everything she needed. She stood, took the encrypted drive, looked at Okafor. You did the right thing, she said. Yes, ma'am, he said very quietly. She was almost at the door when he said, "Carter." She turned. Wasserman turned. He was looking at her with the frank, open curiosity of someone who hadn't yet learned to hide his questions. "Who exactly are you, I mean?" He gestured vaguely at her. "You, really?" She looked at him for a moment. "Someone who was sent here to do a job," she said. And a pause. "And someone who's going to finish it," she said. She walked out into the night with the drive in her pocket and the folder in her bag and the full weight of what she had built over 5 days sitting solid and undeniable in her hands. The compound was quiet around her, lights out in the trainee barracks, a single guard at the main gate half attentive. She had everything she needed to end this. She was 20 feet from the east building when her instincts, honed by years in places where instincts were the difference between walking out and not walking out, fired hard and sudden and completely. She stopped, listened. There were 4 of them in the dark ahead of her. She couldn't see them. She didn't need to. She could hear the specific quality of their breathing controlled the breathing of men who thought they were being quiet, and the subtle displacement of air that bodies created when they were holding very still and waiting. She had been in this exact position before. Not here, in places with different names and different stakes, but the geometry was the same. She stood absolutely still in the dark and calculated. 4 men, positioned to cut off her path to the barracks, which meant they knew where she had been, which meant either Okafor had already made a call, she didn't believe this, but she logged it, or someone had been watching the infrastructure building and had seen her go in, Rourke. Or Hargrove's reach, which she was now reconsidering as potentially longer than she had estimated. She stood in the dark and was very calm and thought about the encrypted drive in her pocket, in the folder in her bag, and Taurus's chin lifting as she walked off the evaluation mat, and every woman whose file she had pulled, and every silent, methodical, infuriating day she had spent in this facility, collecting the evidence that would close this down. She thought about all of it, put it in order, filed it. Then she shifted her weight forward onto the balls of her feet, a habit so old and so deep, it had become something close to instinct, and she walked toward the dark. Because walking away had never been something she was built for. She walked toward them without hesitating. That was the thing about men who set ambushes. They planned for the target to run, or freeze, or back up and try to negotiate. They planned for fear. When fear didn't come, when the person they were waiting for just kept walking toward them at the same steady pace as if she hadn't noticed or hadn't cared, it broke something in the calculation. She could feel it happening before she even reached them, that fractional hesitation, that half second of recalibration where the ambush became uncertain of itself. Rourke stepped out of the dark first, then Hicks, then Boomer, then 2 others she had cataloged as part of Rourke's inner circle, Trainee Walsh, and a thick, quiet man named Pryor who had the stillness of someone who had done physical violence before and hadn't lost sleep over it. 5. She had estimated 4. She adjusted. Rourke had a flashlight. He clicked it on directly into her face, a classic intimidation technique designed to blind and disorient. She didn't blink. She had trained in worse light conditions than this. She had trained in no light at all. "Late night for support staff," Rourke said. She stopped walking. Not because she was stopped, because she chose to. There was a significant difference, and she needed him to understand it, even if he never would. "Sergeant," she said. "Where have you been, Carter?" His voice was pleasant in the way that certain kinds of dangerous men made their voices pleasant, a layer of performance over something much colder underneath. "Server room, maybe infrastructure building, because someone was seen going in there tonight without a work order, and that's a serious protocol violation." "I had authorization from Captain Dietrich," she said. "Dietrich doesn't have authority to authorize server access for support contractors." He took a step toward her. "You know what I think? I think you've been a problem since the moment you got off that transport. I think you're not who you say you are. And I think tonight you crossed a line that justifies us detaining you for a formal security review." He paused, let the word detaining sit in the air between them. "Starting right now." Maya looked at him. Then she looked at each of the 4 men behind him in sequence, unhurried, deliberate, the way a person looked at a situation they were fully inside of and fully at peace with. Walsh shifted his weight. Pryor didn't move at all. Hicks was trying very hard to look confident and succeeding less than he wanted to. Then she looked back at Rourke. "Last warning," she said. The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Rourke laughed the same laugh from the first morning when he had watched her logbook hit the ground. The laugh of a man who had never in his life had a reason to believe that a warning from someone who looked like her meant something real. He nodded at Pryor. Pryor moved first. He was fast for his size, genuinely fast. The kind of fast that came from training rather than just bulk. And he closed the distance between them in under 2 seconds, with his hands already reaching for her jacket collar. He got one hand on it. That was all he got. What happened next took 11 seconds total. She counted them afterward, the way she always counted, because counting kept the event clinical, and clinical kept it manageable, and manageable kept her from becoming something she didn't want to be. Pryor's grip on her collar became a problem for Pryor in about a half second when she didn't pull away from it, which was what he expected, but instead moved into it, closing the distance he thought was his advantage and turning his own pulling force against him. His wrists went in a direction wrists weren't designed to go. Not broken, controlled. He went down to his knees with a sound that wasn't quite a word. Walsh came from her left. She felt him before she fully saw him, that displacement of air again, that shift in the quality of the dark around her, and she was already turning when he reached her. His momentum was considerable, and she used all of it, redirecting him with the specific economy of movement that her instructors years ago in a facility that made this one look like summer camp had called minimum input, maximum result. He went into the ground shoulder first and stayed there. Hicks was slower. He had hesitated when Pryor went down a 1-second pause that he probably didn't know he'd made, but that she had clocked with precision. When he finally committed, she was ready, and he wasn't, and the engagement was brief and left him sitting on the hard-packed dirt with his hands up in the involuntary surrender gesture that the body made when it had been convinced at a fundamental level that it was done. Boomer came with everything he had. She respected that. He was the biggest of them, and he had committed fully, no hesitation, no calculation, just mass and forward momentum and genuine aggression. It almost worked. Almost. She took a glancing hit to her left shoulder that she would feel for 2 days, and in exchange, she took Boomer completely off his feet and put him on the ground in a controlled landing that was, she had to admit, more careful than he deserved. 11 seconds. 4 men down, all breathing, none permanently damaged. Rourke hadn't moved. He was standing 6 feet away with the flashlight still in his hand and an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not calculation, not the particular arrogance that had been his defining characteristic since the first morning. Something rawer than that. Something that lived underneath all of those things and only showed itself when the top layers got stripped away. It looked a great deal like recognition. Not of her specifically, of what she was. The specific category of person she occupied, the kind that existed in the parts of military operations and that didn't appear in training manuals or official records. He was a man who had spent 12 years in this world, and somewhere in those 12 years, he had been close enough to the classified edge to understand when he was looking directly at it, what he was seeing. His flashlight hand lowered slightly. "What are you?" he said, not a challenge, an actual question. "The person who's going to end your career," she said, "and the person who's going to make sure you don't take anyone else down with you when it happens." She looked at him steadily. "That's what I am." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the 4 men on the ground around her. Then back at her. "You can't prove anything," he said, but the certainty was gone from his voice. What was left sounded like a man running his hand along a wall in the dark, looking for a door that might not be there. "I have the raw assessment data from the past 90 days, she said. "I have the disbursement records. I have the original evaluation logs. I have documentation of badge deactivation equipment, interference, and deliberate course sabotage, all time-stamped and corroborated." She paused. "And I have a signed statement from Captain Dietrich." This last part was not yet true, but it would be, and she was certain enough of that to say it now. "Do you want to reconsider your position on what I can prove?" The flashlight clicked off. In the sudden dark, she heard Rourke breathing short, controlled breaths, the breathing of a man doing rapid internal accounting and not liking the numbers. Around her, the 4 men on the ground were making the sounds of men slowly concluding that getting up was not in their immediate interest. Then Rourke said very quietly, "Hargrove will bury this. He's buried everything else." "He won't bury this," Maya said. "You don't know him." "I know the disbursement records have his signature, I know those records are currently in a format that can be transmitted outside this facility in under 3 minutes. She said it without heat. Simply, the way you stated a fact about weather. Hargrove's ability to bury things depends on the things staying inside this facility. That window is closing, Sergeant. Another silence, longer this time. Why are you telling me this? Rourke said. And there was something in the question that surprised her, not the hostility she would have expected, but something that sounded almost like genuine confusion. Like a man who had operated so long inside a system that rewarded ruthlessness that he had genuinely lost the ability to understand why someone would give him information they didn't have to give. She thought about that for a second, about what the right answer was, not the tactical answer, the true one. Because you have 12 years and 2 commendations, she said. Because whatever you became here, you weren't always this. And because the people above you used your loyalty and your ego and your need to be the one in charge to make you the visible face of something that was profitable for them and was going to land entirely on you when it collapsed. She let that sit, which it is about to do tonight. The question is whether you're standing in front of it or beside it when it happens. The silence this time was very long. Pryor had gotten to his feet behind her. She knew this without looking. Walsh was up too. Hicks was sitting. Boomer was still deciding. None of them were moving toward her. Rourke said, "What do you want from me?" "Nothing tonight," she said. "Go back to your barracks. Don't contact Hargrove. Don't move anything, destroy anything, or communicate anything to anyone until morning formation." She paused. "In the morning, you're going to be asked some questions by people with significantly more authority than either of us. How you answer those questions is your business, but make sure you answer them." Another long moment. Then Rourke Sergeant Dale Rourke, 12 years, 2 commendations. The undisputed king of this facility's training yard nodded. It was the smallest nod she had ever seen on a man his size, but it was real. He walked past her without another word into the dark, and the 4 men trailed after him in the specific silence of people who have witnessed something they haven't fully processed yet and won't for quite a while. She stood alone in the compound and let herself have 60 seconds. On the 55th second, her secure communication device, the one she carried in the false bottom of her duffel bag, the one that connected to the people in the building without windows, buzzed once. A single pulse, the signal she had been waiting for. Her extraction team was 12 hours out. She had 12 hours to hold everything together. She went back to her barracks and sat on her cot and thought about what Rourke had said. Hargrove will bury this. He's buried everything else. She believed the second sentence completely. She was less certain about the first one, but less certain was not the same as certain, and Hargrove was a variable that had grown significantly more complicated in the past few hours. The colonel knew she had been in the administrative building. He knew or suspected that she had been in the infrastructure building. He was not a man who reacted slowly to threats. He was a man who had maintained a profitable and corrupt operation inside a military facility for what the disbursement records suggested was at least 3 years, which required a specific kind of disciplined, intelligent ruthlessness that she needed to respect as a capability, even as she moved to dismantle it. She had the encrypted drive. She had the photograph disbursement record. She had Dietrich's potential statement and Okafor's knowledge and Torres's documented experience and the paper trail from the personnel files. It was enough. More than enough if it got out of this facility intact. Getting it out intact was now the question. At 01:30, her device buzzed again. Not the single pulse this time, 3 rapid pulses, the urgent signal, the one that meant something had changed. She was off the cot before the 3rd pulse finished. The message on the device's small screen was 8 words: Hargrove has requested facility lockdown. Authorization pending. Move now. She moved. The facility had 4 exit points. The main gate, the east vehicle bay, the west perimeter, access road, and the emergency egress point on the north side that was technically for fire evacuation purposes and was monitored by a camera that she had noted on day 1 had a 7-second reboot cycle when its power was briefly interrupted. She had been carrying the means to briefly interrupt it since day 2. She was at the north egress point in 4 minutes. The camera rebooted. She was through in 5. Outside the facility perimeter, the desert was cold and absolute. No ambient light, no sound except wind and her own footsteps on the hard ground. She moved east parallel to the perimeter fence toward the coordinates where her extraction team would stage their approach. 12 hours, they had said. But the urgent signal changed the timeline. They would be moving faster now. She had been walking for 11 minutes when she heard the vehicle. Not from the extraction coordinates. From behind her, from the direction of the facility, a single vehicle moving without headlights, which meant it was either someone who knew the terrain very well or someone who had night vision capability. Both possibilities pointed in the same direction. She stopped walking and stood absolutely still and listened to the vehicle's engine, note the pitch of it, the rhythm, the specific quality that told her it was a military-issue SUV moving at moderate speed across broken ground. One vehicle. She counted the door sounds when it stopped too. Two people. She waited. Footsteps. Two sets coming toward her position with the deliberate, unhurried quality of people who knew where she was. GPS tracker. She ran through the possibilities in 3 seconds. Not on her person she had swept herself before leaving the barracks. On the encrypted drive possibly, or on the folder. She had carried the folder from the facility in her bag, and the folder had been inside the facility for 5 days, and she had not swept it for electronic tracking because she had not anticipated needing to. That was a mistake. She owned it and moved on. She put the folder on the ground and stepped away from it and waited. The two figures emerged from the dark 20 feet away. One of them she didn't know was security detail, large, professionally quiet. The other one she knew immediately. Hargrove, silver-haired, straight back, moving through the dark desert in the middle of the night with the same contained authority he brought to morning formation. He stopped when he saw her standing there, folder on the ground between them, arms loose at her sides. "Carter," he said. "Colonel," she said. "You've been busy tonight." "Yes, sir." He looked at the folder on the ground, then at her. "I want the drive," he said, "and whatever you photographed in the records room. All of it." His voice was not threatening. It was simply the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed and was applying that habit to the current situation. "I don't have it on me," she said. "I think you do." "Then you're welcome to search me. That will be interesting to document." A pause. "Who sent you here?" "That's above your clearance level, Colonel," she said. Something moved in his face, brief, controlled, quickly suppressed. The specific expression of a man who was recalculating fast, who had just heard a phrase that meant something specific about the category of person he was dealing with, and who was sophisticated enough to understand what that category meant for his options. "Whatever you think you found," he said carefully, "is more complicated than it looks. The disbursement records are pretty straightforward," she said. "Money moves in complex ways through training budgets. There are contextual explanations. For 4 washed-out female trainees with fabricated evaluation failures." He was quiet. "For a sergeant who operates with impunity because the commanding officer is financially incentivized to look the other way." She said it without heat, stated it the way she stated everything, as information, as simple fact as the thing that existed, whether anyone was comfortable with it or not. Hargrove looked at her for a long time. The security detail beside him was a tension she was tracking in her peripheral vision. Right hand slightly elevated, which meant he was trained and carrying, and was waiting for a signal he hadn't gotten yet. She was monitoring the signal. "You're not getting off this facility tonight," Hargrove said. "The lockdown authorization," she said, "is still pending as of 11 minutes ago. Do you want to tell me it's come through?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "The authorization requires a counter-signature from the regional oversight commander," she said. "I'm going to estimate that the regional oversight commander is currently being contacted by people who received a data transmission about 15 minutes ago. A transmission that originated from this facility and that contained, among other things, the contents of the encrypted drive and the photographed disbursement records." She paused. "Which means the lockdown authorization is not coming through, and you know that." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. The security detail's right hand lowered. He had read the room. She respected him for it. Hargrove stood very still in the dark desert, and she watched the thing that happened to a man when the structure he had built over years, the careful, profitable, self-reinforcing structure, collapsed simultaneously from multiple directions. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, and it was terrible in its own way, and she didn't look away from it because looking away would have been a kind of dishonesty that she didn't allow herself. "The regional commander," Hargrove said slowly, "you've already." "The transmission went out when I was in the infrastructure building," she said, "before I left. Okafor pulled the data. I transmitted it. The encrypted drive I'm carrying is a backup. She looked at him steadily. I told you, Colonel, I'm very good at what I do. Another long silence. Then Hargrove said something she hadn't expected. He said, how many of them didn't make it through because of me? She looked at him carefully, parsing the question. Not a legal question, he knew the number. A different kind of question. The kind that men asked at 3 a.m. in the dark desert when the structure was gone and what was left was something older and more honest. 4 that I can document, she said. Possibly more. He nodded, a slow, heavy nod. Specialist Torres, he said. Still in the program, Maya said, as of this morning, and if I have anything to say about it, she stays there. He absorbed this. Then he said to his security detail, Kowalski, get back in the vehicle. The man hesitated. Hargrove looked at him. That's an order, Kowalski. Kowalski walked back to the vehicle. Hargrove looked at Maya. I'm going to go back to my office, he said, and I'm going to sit there until whoever you sent that transmission to decides what happens next. He paused. Is that the right thing to do? It was the most human thing she had heard him say in 5 days of observation. Maybe the most human thing he had said in years. She considered it seriously because it deserved a serious answer. Yes, she said, that's the right thing to do. He nodded again. Then he walked back to the vehicle and got in, and the vehicle drove back toward the facility without headlights, and she stood alone in the desert and watched its taillights go dark as it moved away from her. And she breathed cold desert air, and she thought about Torres on the evaluation mat, and about Dietrich in the corridor, and about Okafor at his workstation, making the first consequential decision of his adult life, and about 4 women whose files she had pulled from a cabinet in a locked room who deserved to have someone pull their files. Her device buzzed. 1 pulse, then 3 short, then 1 long. Extraction team was 2 hours out. Accelerated. The transmission had landed. She was going to make it. She stood in the desert for 60 seconds, just 60 no more, and let herself feel something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived in the territory between them, in the same place that the thing earlier had lived, the thing that wasn't anger and wasn't grief. She was learning that her emotional life occupied a great deal of territory between things, between the named feelings, in the unnamed spaces where the real experiences lived. Then she started walking toward the extraction coordinates. She had 2 hours and several things still to do. The first thing was Torres. She was not going to leave this facility without making sure Torres's status was formally protected before the chain of command restructuring that was about to happen. Restructuring created gaps, and gaps swallowed people, and she had not spent 5 days documenting this to have Torres fall through a gap. She pulled out her device and sent a short text to the number that connected to the oversight office receiving her transmission. Recommend immediate formal freeze on all pending washout notifications. Facility personnel code 7741. Torres A specialist. Priority protection. The response came in 90 seconds. Confirmed. Freeze in place. She put the device away and kept walking. The second thing was Rourke. She thought about him as she walked about the nod in the dark, the smallest nod she had ever seen on a man his size, about his question, why are you telling me this? And about her answer, which she had meant. She had meant all of it. The 12 years, the commendations, the system that had used him. She didn't feel sympathy for him, exactly. Sympathy felt like too soft a word for something too complicated, but she felt something. The recognition of a person who had made choices and had had those choices shaped by forces larger than they understood, and who was now going to have to sit with the full accounting of what those choices had produced. That was going to be harder for him than anything she had done to him in 11 seconds. She walked for another 40 minutes before she stopped. Found a flat stretch of ground that she knew from the topographic map was at the extraction coordinates and sat down. The desert was cold. She was warm. Her shoulder where Boomer had connected was a dull, persistent ache that she mentally cataloged and filed under acceptable. She sat in the dark and waited. At 0347, she heard the helicopter. It came in from the east, low and quiet, the specific acoustic profile of a bird running with minimal electronic signature, the kind of approach that only certain teams made in certain situations. It landed 40 feet from her position in a controlled descent, rotors down to idle side door open before the skids were fully on the ground. A figure stepped out, compact, direct, moving toward her with the efficiency of someone who had done this particular type of extraction before and had a great deal of other things to do afterward. The figure stopped in front of her. Carter, he said, the voice of someone she had worked with before in a different desert under different circumstances that also didn't appear in any official record. Reeves, she said. You look terrible, he said. I look fine, she said. You've got a shoulder. I have two shoulders. One of them is slightly annoyed. Let's go. He almost smiled. The almost was his version of a full smile. Everything we need is on the drive. Everything and more, she said, including something about Hargrove that's going to require about 3 levels of oversight response. We saw that in the transmission. He started walking back toward the helicopter. Regional commander is already on it. Jag is being notified. It's going to be a long morning for a lot of people. Torres needs to stay in the program, she said. He looked at her sideways as they walked, already flagged. You sent the text. I want verbal confirmation. Carter. Verbal confirmation, Reeves. He looked at her for a moment. Then Torres stays in the program. You have my word. She nodded. They reached the helicopter. She put her hand on the doorframe and stopped. She turned and looked back at the facility, the lights of it visible from here as a low orange glow against the dark sky, the kind of light that a community of people made when they were all in the same place sleeping unaware of the thing that had just shifted in the architecture of their world. She thought about the first morning, the transport vehicle, the gate, the hot shimmering air, and the man who had dumped her logbook on the ground and laughed. She thought about walking toward the dark because walking away had never been something she was built for. Carter, Reeves said quietly, time to go. She looked at the light for one more second. Then she climbed into the helicopter and didn't look back again. The helicopter touched down at 0521 at a facility that didn't appear on any public map in a state that the flight manifest, if there had been a flight manifest, would have listed as classified. Maya had been to this building twice before, both times under circumstances that she had filed in the same mental drawer where she kept everything that was true about her life but couldn't be spoken in ordinary conversation. Reeves walked her through security without stopping. That told her something about the level of urgency the overnight transmission had created. When you walk through security without stopping, it meant the people inside had been waiting for you, which meant the information had landed hard enough to change schedules. She was right. The room they put her in had 4 people in it. 2 she knew, 2 she didn't. The one she knew best was a woman named Caldwell, early 60s, silver hair cut short and practical, the kind of face that had seen enough of the world's worst decisions that it had stopped registering surprise as a default response. Caldwell ran the oversight division that had sent Maya to the facility. She was sitting at the head of the table with her hands folded in front of her, and the expression of someone who had been awake for approximately as long as Maya had and was handling it with more grace. Carter, she said. Ma'am, Maya said. Sit down before you fall down. Maya sat. Her shoulder made its opinion of this known. She ignored it. The transmission came through clean, Caldwell said. We've had JAG and Regional Command working on it for the past 3 hours. Hargrove is currently sitting in his office, as you apparently suggested, waiting for the people who are coming to see him. She looked at Maya with the particular attention she reserved for situations that exceeded initial projections. You found more than we expected. The financial connection to Hargrove wasn't in the original brief, Maya said. No, it wasn't. Caldwell glanced at the 2 people Maya didn't know, both of them in civilian clothes, both of them carrying the specific energy of lawyers, which meant JAG. What was in the brief was one rogue sergeant with a pattern of discriminatory evaluation practices. What we have now is a coordinated scheme with commanding officer involvement, financial fraud, and at least 4 documented victims. She paused. Possibly more. I pulled 3 years of records, 4 confirmed. I flagged the possibility of additional cases in the transmission notes. We saw that. We're already pulling the expanded file set. One of the JAG lawyers leaned forward and said something quietly to Caldwell. She listened, nodded, looked back at Maya. There's a question about the method of records access, the administrative building, the server room. I had authorization for the server room from Captain Dietrich, Maya said. And the administrative building, a pause. I had authorization from my standing operational directive, which permits access to any facility documentation relevant to the investigation mandate. The lawyer made a note. Caldwell's expression didn't change. She had heard this kind of answer before. She had probably written the operational directive that made this kind of answer possible. "We'll work with that," she said, which was the Oversight Division's way of saying we'll make it clean. "Torres," Maya said. "Freeze is confirmed. She stays in the program. Her evaluation scores are under formal review. We expect the fabricated assessments to be corrected within 48 hours, at which point her actual performance record will place her in the top quarter of her cohort." Caldwell said it matter-of-factly, the way she delivered most news, but something in her eyes when she said it was less matter-of-fact. Something that looked briefly like the satisfaction of a woman who had sent another woman into a difficult place and gotten back exactly what she had hoped for. "You did good work, Carter." "Torres did good work," Maya said. "She just needed someone to count it correctly." Caldwell looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Get your shoulder looked at. There's a medical officer 2 doors down. After that, debrief room 3. 2 hours." She stood, which meant everyone else stood. "And Carter, there are 4 women who washed out of that program in the past 3 years who are going to have a path to reinstatement because of what you pulled off that server tonight. I want you to know that." Maya heard this. She held it for a second. Let it mean what it meant. "Yes, ma'am," she said. She went to get her shoulder looked at. The medical officer, young, efficient, the practiced hands of someone who had seen field injuries without asking too many questions about how they happened, confirmed what she already knew. Muscle bruising, no structural damage, ice and anti-inflammatories in the kind of rest that she was not going to get for the foreseeable future. She thanked him, took the anti-inflammatories, skipped the ice, and went to debrief room 3. The debrief took 2 hours and 40 minutes. She told them everything in sequence without editorializing with the timestamp she had maintained throughout. The 2 JAG lawyers asked questions that were precise and well-informed. They had clearly reviewed the transmission contents thoroughly in the time available. Reeves sat in the corner and took his own notes and said nothing, which was standard for Reeves. When it was done, she signed 3 documents and was told that her operational involvement in the matter was formally concluded. She walked out of this building into early morning light, real sunlight, not the orange glow of a facility at night, and stood on the steps for a moment and breathed. It was 0847. She had been awake for approximately 27 hours. Her shoulder ached. The debrief coffee had been terrible. She had a return transport scheduled for 1300 that would take her back to the staging location where her personal vehicle was parked, which was the first step in the process of resuming the version of her life that existed between assignments, the version that had a small apartment in a city she liked, a coffee shop she visited on mornings when she was allowed to, and a shelf of books that she read slowly and carefully because slowly and carefully was the only way she knew how to do anything. Her device buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number, which in her world meant a known number that was routing through a masking protocol. She answered. "Carter," a voice she recognized immediately. Not from the Oversight Division, not from JAG, from somewhere older than that, from a building in a different city where the decisions got made that rippled outward into facilities like the one she had just left. The voice of a man named Garrett, not the specialist Garrett from the training facility, a different Garrett entirely, a Garrett who had no last name in any conversation she had ever had with him. "Good work tonight." "Thank you," she said. "We need you back in the field." A pause briefed, the kind that wasn't hesitation but emphasis. Not the same type of work, something different. She looked at the early morning light on the steps. How different? Significantly. Another pause. "There's a situation developing. Connected to your original work, the Mosul operation, the arms trafficking network that your classified mission disrupted." His voice was careful, precise. The voice of someone choosing each word with the awareness that words in their line of work had weight. It didn't stay disrupted. She was quiet for a moment. The Mosul operation, the classified mission that had ended with her official death, and the beginning of the version of her life that had no name on any accessible document. She had known in the way that she knew most things, not from evidence, but from the structural logic of the situation, that the disruption she had achieved in Mosul had been temporary. Networks like that one were not destroyed by single operations. They were damaged. They regrouped. They rebuilt under different names with different intermediaries in the same fundamental architecture. "How far along is the rebuild?" she said. "Far enough that it matters. Not so far that it's too late." Garrett let that sit. "But the window is closing." She looked at the light. Thought about the small apartment in the coffee shop and the shelf of books. Thought about the transport at 1300 and what it led to. Then she thought about Mosul, about the mission that had officially ended her, about the reason she had walked into it in the first place, not following orders, or not only that, but because there had been a specific injustice at the end of a specific chain of decisions that she had the capability to address, and the capability to address something had always felt to her like a kind of obligation. "Tell me what you have," she said. Garrett told her. It took 11 minutes. She stood on the steps of the building without a public address and listened to the shape of the new problem. The names that had changed the routes, that had shifted the intermediary, who had emerged as the new operational center of a network that moved weapons through channels that looked on the surface like legitimate logistics contracts. A logistics contractor. She thought about the disbursement records she had photographed in the records room, the contractor's name that had meant nothing to her on the surface. "Garrett," she said, "the contractor connected to Hargrove's disbursements. What's the full entity name?" A pause. The sound of papers, or the digital equivalent. "Meridian Tactical Logistics Group." Why? She was very still. "Because that name is in the documentation from the facility I just left. It's in a financial disbursement record authorized by the commanding officer." The silence on Garrett's end was the silence of a man whose understanding of a situation had just expanded rapidly in a direction he hadn't anticipated. "Carter," he said slowly, "are you telling me the facility is connected to Meridian?" "I'm telling you the disbursement record shows a payment to Meridian Tactical Logistics Group authorized by Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove dated 14 months ago." She said it precisely. "I don't know what the payment was for. It may be completely legitimate, but the name is the same." "Nothing connected to Meridian is completely legitimate," Garrett said. Another silence. Longer. "The Mosul network," she said. "When it rebuilt, where did the logistical infrastructure come from?" "We traced it to a series of domestic contracting entities that provided cover for the routing operations." His voice had changed, slower, more careful, the voice of someone reassembling a picture they thought they understood into a shape they hadn't expected. "Meridian was one of 4 entities we identified. We thought it was peripheral, an ancillary node." "What if it wasn't peripheral?" she said. "Then we've been looking at this from the wrong direction for 14 months. A long pause. "Carter, the documentation you pulled from the facility, the disbursement records, are in the transmission that JAG received at 0200 this morning," she said, "which means they're already in the system, which means someone in JAG is currently looking at a Meridian connection and may or may not understand what they're looking at." "I need to make some calls," Garrett said. "I need to make one first," she said. She hung up and immediately dialed Caldwell. Caldwell answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting the call. "You saw the Meridian name," Caldwell said. "You already knew," Maya said. "We noticed it 40 minutes ago. We've been working to understand what it means." Caldwell's voice was careful, more careful than usual, which told Maya something about how significant this was. "Carter, the Hargrove disbursement to Meridian, if it connects to the Mosul network rebuild, then the facility wasn't just a corrupt training environment, Maya said. It was a node, a funding channel, hidden inside legitimate military training budget allocations." She said it and heard it as she said it and understood the full weight of it for the first time, the way you sometimes had to say a thing out loud before your mind would let you completely believe it. Hargrove wasn't just protecting Rourke to run his private operation. Rourke's operation was generating cover. The training budget irregularities were the mechanism for moving money. "That's our working theory as of 40 minutes ago," Caldwell said. "We need to get Hargrove into formal questioning before his legal counsel tells him to stop talking. He's currently still sitting in his office, which means we have a window." "Who's going to question him?" A pause, the kind that had an answer in it before the words came. "We'd like it to be you." Maya stood on the steps in the early morning light and considered this. Going back to the facility, sitting across from Hargrove again, not in the desert at 0300 with her folder in her bag and his security detail lowering his weapon hand, but in a formal setting with the full institutional weight of what she had built over 5 days arranged behind her like a wall. When she said, "Transport in 40 minutes, Caldwell said, "I know you haven't slept." "I'm fine." "Carter." 40 minutes, she said. "I'll be ready." She put the device away and stood in the light for exactly 60 seconds. She had been awake for 27 hours. Her shoulder was a persistent, specific ache. The debrief coffee had been terrible and she hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. None of this was unusual. None of this was by the standards of her operational life even particularly notable. What was notable was the feeling in her chest, not the tiredness, not the adrenaline aftermath, but something underneath those things. Something that had been there since Garrett had said the words Mosul operation, and she had felt the ground shift under her feet in a way it hadn't shifted in years. She had spent years being erased, years operating without a name, without a record, without the kind of identity that allowed you to stand in a room and say, I am here. This is what I have done. This is what I know. She had done it because it was necessary, because the work required it, because the alternative being visible, being traceable, being a person with a continuous existence that connected to the decisions she made was dangerous in ways that extended beyond her own safety. But standing on these steps, with the Mosul connection opening up like a door she had thought was permanently closed, she felt something shift. Not resolve, she had always had resolve. Something older than that. The specific weight of a person who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and was beginning to understand that alone was not the same as necessary. The transport came in 38 minutes. She was on it. The flight back to the facility took 40 minutes. She spent 30 of them reviewing everything she knew about Meridian Tactical Logistics Group, which from publicly accessible information was almost nothing. A contracting entity incorporated 3 years ago, registered in a state with permissive corporate transparency laws. A single named officer who was a lawyer and whose function was almost certainly the specific legal function of making the entity difficult to investigate. 47 contracts with various government entities over 36 months, all small enough to avoid the scrutiny thresholds that triggered formal audit. Small enough. She thought about that, about the specific intelligence of building a financial architecture out of transactions that were individually below the attention threshold. You didn't need large transactions if you had enough small ones. You needed patience and a network of insertion points, places where money could enter the system wearing the right costume. A training facility, a corrupt evaluation operation that generated irregular budget activity as a matter of course. A commanding officer who needed to make the irregular activity look like normal operational expenditure. And a contracting entity that could receive payments for services that were vague enough to justify and small enough to avoid scrutiny. It was elegant in the way that genuinely malicious things were sometimes elegant. She had spent enough time studying the architecture of bad decisions to recognize craftsmanship when she saw it. The transport landed. She was in the facility within 10 minutes, moving through a compound that felt entirely different than the one she had left 8 hours ago. The difference was visible. Security presence significantly elevated. 3 vehicles she didn't recognize parked near the administrative building, JAG, she assumed, and regional command. Trainees moving through the yard with the careful, uncertain energy of people who knew something large had happened but didn't have enough information to know what. Instructors clustered near the equipment shed in a conversation that stopped when she walked past. She didn't look at them. She kept walking. Torres was standing near the water station on the east side of the yard. She saw Maya and went very still, the stillness of someone trying to decide if what they were seeing was real. Maya gave her a single nod as she passed, small, certain, the nod of a person who had made a promise and kept it. Torres' face did something complicated. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Maya kept walking. Hargrove was in his office. He looked up when she came in, and the expression on his face confirmed what she had assessed in the desert at 0300, a man who had come to a kind of reckoning and was sitting inside it. He looked older than he had at formation 5 days ago. Not physically, in some other way that happened to people when the structure they had been inhabiting collapsed and they had to exist without it. She sat down across from him without being invited. "Colonel," she said. "Carter." He looked at her for a moment. "Or whatever your name actually is." "Carter is fine," she said. He nodded slowly. His hands were on the desk in front of him, flat and still. The hands of someone who had decided to be transparent and was using the stillness as a way of demonstrating it. "Meridian," she said. He closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. "You found that." "It was in the transmission that went out at 0200. I want to know what the payment was for." A pause, long enough that she was about to push, but he spoke before she did. "Consulting services," he said. "That's what the contract said." Consulting services for training program optimization. He said the words like they tasted wrong, which they did because they were the words of a man who had known when he wrote them that they were fiction. The money went to Meridian. I never knew exactly where it went from there. I told myself I didn't need to know. Who approached you about the arrangement? He looked at his hands. Man named Voss, civilian. Came through a mutual contact, someone I'd known from a previous posting. He was very good at framing it, making it sound like a standard consulting arrangement, making the numbers sound unremarkable. A pause. I should have asked more questions. Yes, she said. You should have. I know that. His voice was quiet. I've known that for 14 months. He looked up at her. Is this connected to something larger, Voss? Is he connected to something I should have known about? She looked at him carefully, parsing the question. He was asking genuinely, she could hear it. Not legal strategy, not deflection. The actual terrible question of a man who had made a corrupt choice and was now trying to understand how large the thing was that he had fed. We believe so, she said. I can't tell you more than that, but your cooperation in the next few hours is going to matter significantly to how this resolves. I'll cooperate, he said, without hesitation. Whatever you need. She believed him, not because she was naive, she had not been naive for a very long time, but because she had learned to read the specific quality of a decision that was made from genuine reckoning rather than tactical calculation, and this was that quality. There are JAG officers outside, she said. They're going to come in and they're going to ask you questions. I want you to answer every single one of them. I want you to tell them everything about Voss, about the contact who introduced you, about every communication you had with Meridian and every payment you authorized. She leaned forward slightly. And I want you to tell them about Rourke, everything. Not the version where Rourke was a sergeant who got out of hand. The version where a commanding officer created an environment where a subordinate's abusive behavior was operationally useful because it generated the budget irregularities that made the Meridian payments harder to trace. Hargrove looked at her. He had gone pale again, the same specific pallor as in the desert. You think I used Rourke? I think Voss used you, and you used Rourke, and Rourke used his position, and Torres, and 4 other women absorbed the cost of all of it, she said. That's the chain. And I want it on record from your mouth in that sequence so that no one in this chain can hide behind anyone below them when this comes to final accounting. A long silence. You're not just here about the facility, he said slowly. You're here about the network, about where the money went. I'm here about all of it, she said. I've been here about all of it since before I got off that transport vehicle. He absorbed this. His hands were still flat on the desk, still very still. The man who introduced me to Voss, he said. His name is Colonel Marcus Webb, retired. He's stationed. He lives now in Phoenix. He had contacts in 6 other facilities. Training commands. I don't know all of them. But I know he ran this same approach in at least 3 other places. He held her gaze. I've been holding that for 14 months. I don't want to hold it anymore. She looked at him for one steady moment. Then she picked up her device and sent a single line to Garrett Webb Marcus. Colonel retired. Phoenix, 6 facilities. Confirm and move. Garrett's response came in 40 seconds. Confirmed. Webb is known. We've been looking for the connection. Moving. She put the device away. The JAG officers are going to come in now, she said. Tell them everything in the same order you told me. Start with Voss, end with Webb. She stood. Don't protect anyone in this chain, Colonel. Not yourself, not Rourke, not Voss, not Webb. The only way this resolves correctly is if the whole thing comes out whole. He nodded. That same slow, heavy nod from the desert. I understand. She went to the door, put her hand on the frame. Then, because she was not a person who left things unfinished, the 4 women, Torres and the 3 before her, their service records are going to reflect what their actual performance merited. That's already in motion. She looked back at him. But I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you say that you understand what was done to them. Hargrove was quiet for a moment. She could see him with it, really with it, in the specific way of someone who had been managing distance from a thing and was now choosing to close that distance. I understand, he said. His voice was low. What was done to them was wrong. What I allowed was wrong. He met her eyes. I'm sorry, I know that doesn't fix anything. No, she said. It doesn't. She paused. But it's a start. She opened the door and nodded to the JAO officers waiting in the corridor. They went in. She stepped aside and watched the door close behind them and stood in the corridor for one moment with her hand still raised from the door handle. Her device buzzed again. Garrett, she answered. Webb is in custody as of 11 minutes ago, Garrett said. Phoenix field office made contact. He's talking. A pause. Carter, the Mosul network, we've had the wrong picture of it for 14 months. Webb was the domestic infrastructure, which means we've had people looking at the wrong layer of the operation. Another pause. Waited. We need you on this, not as a contractor, not as a function. His voice changed. Something in it that she hadn't heard from Garrett in years. Something that sounded like the acknowledgement of a debt. We need you as Maya Carter, with your full record, your actual record. She stood in the corridor and heard that. Her full record. Her actual record. The record that had been classified, buried, officially replaced with a death certificate in a closed file. The record of a Navy SEAL ghost operator who had walked into a building in Mosul and come out the other side as something the institutional military didn't have a category for. The record of a person who had spent years being a function and a capability and a solution, but not a name. Not a continuous human being with a history that connected to the present. That record is classified, she said, but she said it carefully, in the tone of a question rather than a statement. It can be declassified, Garrett said, if you want it to be. She stood very still. The corridor was quiet around her. From behind the closed door of Hargrove's office, she could hear the low, careful voices of the JAG interview beginning. From somewhere in the facility, through a wall, through distance, she could feel the presence of Torres in the yard standing near the water station, with her chin up and her record about to be corrected. She thought about the helicopter and Reeves saying you look terrible and her saying I have two shoulders. One of them is slightly annoyed. She thought about the coffee shop in the city she liked, the shelf of books, the small apartment, the version of a life that existed between assignments, the version that was quiet and hers and real, even if it was also incomplete. She thought about walking toward the dark, because walking away had never been something she was built for. Yes, she said, I want it to be. Garrett was quiet for 1 second. 2, then, good, we'll start the process. It's going to take time, Carter. Months, probably. There are layers. I know how many layers there are, she said. I've been navigating them for years. You have, he said, and there was something in his voice that was as close to warmth as Garrett got. Report to Caldwell when you're done there. She'll brief you on the full Mosul picture. A pause. And Carter, welcome back. She put the device in her pocket, stood in the corridor for 60 seconds. On the 59th second, she realized she was smiling. Not a large smile. The kind that lived at the corners of your mouth and didn't announce itself. The kind that came from the deep place where things were true before they were feelings. She was coming back, not as a ghost, not as a classified asset with an erased name, as Maya Carter, as a person with a record that connected to the present and a history that could be spoken aloud in rooms with other people. She pushed off the wall and started walking toward Caldwell's temporary office at the end of the corridor, moving with the steady, unhurried pace that she had walked through every gate and every yard and every moment of the past 5 days, the pace of someone who knew exactly where she was going and was not in any particular hurry because she understood finally and completely that the destination was real. Caldwell's temporary office was the size of a supply closet with better furniture. She was on the phone when Maya walked in, held up one finger without looking up, and finished her call in 30 seconds, with the clipped efficiency of someone who treated language as a resource to be conserved. She put the phone down and looked at Maya with the full attention that was Caldwell's version of warmth. Hargrove's talking, she said. Full cooperation. Webb's already given the Phoenix field office 3 names we didn't have. The Mosul network picture is changing by the hour. She folded her hands. Sit down, Carter. I mean it this time. Maya sat. Her shoulder had upgraded from persistent ache to a low, constant burn that she was managing by not thinking about it directly. The anti-inflammatory was working at approximately 60% efficiency, which she considered acceptable. Tell me about Voss, she said. Caldwell pulled a thin folder from the stack beside her and slid it across the desk. Real name Anton Voss, Austrian national dual citizenship. Former logistics coordinator for a private military contractor, that dissolved in 2019 under circumstances that were, let's say, legally ambiguous. He surfaced 18 months ago under the Meridian umbrella. She tapped the folder. He's the one who rebuilt the network after Mosul. Not from scratch, he used the existing infrastructure. The routes you disrupted were rerouted, not abandoned. New intermediaries, new financial channels, same fundamental operation. Maya looked at the folder but didn't open it yet. Where is he now? That, Caldwell said, is the question of the morning. She leaned back. We have a last known location from 8 days ago. Since then, nothing, which means he either knows we're close or he's in the middle of an operational move. A pause. Our working theory is both. If Webb gave you 3 names, 2 of those names are financial intermediaries, useful for prosecution, not for finding Voss. Caldwell's eyes were steady and direct. The 3rd name is a logistics coordinator who we believe is currently in contact with Voss, someone who manages the physical movement side of the operation, someone who would know where Voss is staging from. Another pause. Waited. His name is Carver, Derek Carver, former Army logistics officer, medically discharged 4 years ago. He's been working for Meridian since its incorporation. Maya was very still. The name moved through her with the specific resonance of something half-remembered. Not Carver specifically, but the shape of the connection. Logistics officer, Army, medically discharged. She ran the timeline against the Mosul operation in her head. 4 years ago, 18 months after Mosul. Was Carver connected to the original network? She said. Caldwell looked at her carefully. We think he was a peripheral contact, not operational. Someone who provided routing intelligence in exchange for payments that we never traced back far enough. She paused. Until now. Where is Carver? 40 minutes from this facility, Caldwell said, which is not a coincidence. The room went quiet. Maya heard the weight of that sentence fully. 40 minutes, which meant Carver hadn't been randomly located near a military training facility in the desert, which meant the facility, Hargrove Meridian, the disbursements had been at least in part chosen because of its proximity to a logistics coordinator who was managing the physical movement of the rebuilt network. The facility wasn't just a funding node, it was a geographic anchor. Garrett knows this, she said. Garrett has known for approximately 20 minutes. He's coordinating with field assets, but Caldwell stopped, chose her next words with the care of someone who understood their weight. The field assets don't have your knowledge of this operation, Carter. They don't have your understanding of the Mosul network structure, of how it moves, of how Voss thinks. She held Maya's eyes. You do. Maya looked at the folder on the desk, then at Caldwell. You're asking me to go back out. I'm telling you the situation and trusting you to make the decision, Caldwell said. It was a distinction that mattered to both of them. Maya opened the folder. Carver's Vault file was sparse in the way that files were sparse when someone had been careful for a long time. A photograph mid-40s leaned the kind of face that was designed to be forgettable. A service record that ended with a medical discharge notation and nothing afterward. A current address that was probably not current. And a single flagged communication intercepted 48 hours ago that consisted of 11 words, shipment moving Thursday, confirmed staging point. Voss needs confirmation by 1800. She looked at the timestamp on the intercepted communication. It was currently 10:23 on Wednesday. Thursday was tomorrow. 1800 was 31 hours away. She closed the folder. I need a vehicle, she said, and I need Torres. Caldwell blinked. It was the closest thing to surprise Maya had ever seen on Caldwell's face. Torres is a specialist trainee. Torres has been navigating this facility's terrain for 3 months. She knows the ground within a 50-mile radius from the navigation exercises. She is sharp, she is motivated, and she is the one person in this facility whose evaluation scores I trust completely because I watched her earn every single one of them while someone was actively trying to destroy them. Maya stood. She's also owed, and I don't leave debt uncollected. Caldwell was quiet for a moment, then, she's a civilian trainee, Carter. I can't authorize her for an operational. I'm not asking for operational authorization for Torres. I'm asking for a civilian consultant with terrain knowledge to ride in a vehicle to a location 40 minutes from here while I do my job. She held Caldwell's gaze. That's a completely different category. A long pause. The specific pause of a senior officer identifying the exact boundary of the regulation being proposed and deciding whether it was the right boundary to stand at. "The vehicle will be ready in 15 minutes, Caldwell said. Maya was already at the door. She found Torres at the water station where she had left her. Torres looked up when she heard footsteps, and her whole body changed when she saw who it was, not relaxing exactly, but something in her realigning the way a compass needle realigned when the magnetic field stabilized. "I need your help," Maya said. Torres stared at her. "My help? You've run the navigation exercise routes within 50 miles of this facility for 3 months. You know the terrain." She looked at Torres directly. "There's a man 40 minutes from here who has information I need. I'm going to go get it. I want you with me." Torres was quiet for 3 seconds. "Then who are you actually?" Maya considered this. The question deserved a real answer. Not the full answer that was going to take longer than the 15 minutes she had, but a real one. "I'm someone who was sent here to fix what was being done to you and the women who came before you," she said. "And I did that. But there's something larger connected to it that I need to finish, and I need someone next to me who I trust." The word trust landed between them with the weight of everything the past 5 days had built. "You trust me," Torres said. "Not a question, an accounting. You held for 48 hours under conditions that would have broken most people," Maya said. "Yes, I trust you." Torres looked at her water bottle, then at the facility behind her, then at Maya. "Let's go," she said. The vehicle was a standard-issue SUV, unmarked with a full tank and a GPS system that Maya disabled immediately on the grounds that she didn't need it and didn't want it tracking the route. Torres sat in the passenger seat and said nothing for the first 5 minutes, which Maya appreciated. She drove southeast following the network of access roads that connected the facility to the larger highway system, moving at consistent speed. At the 6-minute mark, Torres said, "The interception, the communication you were working from, how old is it?" Maya glanced at her. 48 hours. So the staging point might have moved. It might have. But you're going to Carver anyway. Carver knows where the staging point is now, Maya said, whether or not the 48-hour-old communication is still accurate. Torres thought about this. "How are you going to get him to tell you?" "I'm going to ask him," Maya said. Torres looked at her. "That's it. People tell me things," Maya said. "It's a skill." Torres made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was in the same family. "I noticed," she said. They drove for another 20 minutes in a silence that was comfortable, in the specific way of two people who had been through something together and didn't need to fill the space between them with noise. The desert moved past the windows. The morning light was full, now hot and direct, and the road stretched ahead without traffic. At the 28th minute, Torres said, "Carter." Her voice had changed. "There's a vehicle behind us. It's been there since we left the facility access road." Maya checked the mirror. Gray SUV, 2 vehicles back, maintaining exact distance with the specific consistency of someone who was trained to follow without losing the target. Not police, the spacing was wrong for police. Not a coincidence, the distance, maintenance was too deliberate. "I see it," she said. "Who is it?" "Someone who knows where we're going," Maya said, "which means someone who has access to the same information we do and doesn't want us to get there first." She calculated quickly. 3 possibilities: Meridian's own surveillance of Carver's location, which would mean Voss had been tipped. A competing federal interest, another agency working the same network from a different angle. Or something she hadn't anticipated yet, which was always the most dangerous category. "What do we do?" Torres said. Her voice was controlled, tight but controlled. The voice of someone who was afraid and was not letting the fear make decisions for her. "We don't go to Carver directly," Maya said. "We change the approach." She turned off the main road onto a secondary access route, unpaved, hard-packed, the kind of road that appeared on topographic maps but not on standard GPS systems. "Do you know this road?" she said. Torres looked out his window, studied the terrain with the focused attention of someone who had navigated it on foot. "Navigation exercise route 7, she said. "It runs parallel to the highway for about 4 miles, then cuts north toward the ridge." A pause. "If you follow it 3 miles and turn east, there's a utility access path that runs to the back of the commercial district on Route 9, which puts us at Carver's last known address from the back," Maya said, "without coming through the main approach." "Yes," Torres said. "And then you knew about this road." I knew about the road, Maya said. I needed to know if you knew about the terrain. Torres was quiet for a moment. Testing me, she said. Trusting you, Maya said. There's a difference. The gray SUV had not followed them off the main road. That told her something. Not that they had lost the tail, they hadn't. The tail had simply split off to maintain the primary approach route, which meant there were at least two vehicles and probably a coordinated intercept being set up at Carver's front approach, which meant her window at the back entrance was narrowing. She accelerated. Torres gripped the door handle but said nothing. They reached the utility access path in 4 minutes. Maya turned east and pushed the vehicle as fast as the surface allowed, which was faster than it looked. 3 minutes later, they came out behind a row of commercial units on Route 9 storage facilities, a repair shop, the kind of low-visibility commercial real estate that attracted exactly the kind of tenant who valued low visibility. Carver's address was Unit 14. She found it from the access numbers on the rear of the buildings without slowing down, then parked 2 units away and stopped. Stay in the vehicle, she said to Torres. Carter, if I'm not back in 12 minutes, call this number. She put a card on the dash with a number handwritten in her precise script. Tell them Carter needs extraction at the Route 9 utility corridor. They'll know what to do. Torres looked at the card, then at Maya. 12 minutes. 12 minutes, Maya confirmed. She got out and moved. The back entrance to Unit 14 was a standard commercial roll door padlocked and a secondary personnel door beside it that had a newer lock than the rest of the unit recently replaced, which told her the previous lock had been compromised at some point. She had the personnel door open in 8 seconds and was inside before the count reached 10. The unit was being used as an operational staging area. She understood this immediately from the specific arrangement of materials, not from the materials themselves, which were mundane on the surface, but from the way they were organized. The spatial logic of a person who thought in logistics, in movement, in the sequencing of physical objects through space. Crates. A folding table with a laptop. A whiteboard with rote notations in a shorthand she partially recognized from the Mosul operation briefings she had memorized years ago. Carver was at the laptop. He heard her come in the door, made a sound, and he turned with the speed of someone who had been operating in a heightened state for long enough that their reflexes were permanently elevated. He was on his feet before she reached the table. Sit down, she said. He didn't sit down. He was bigger than his file photograph suggested, and he had the specific body language of a man who had made a rapid assessment and decided he had options. He moved to his left towards something on the crate beside him. She didn't know what didn't need to know because the movement itself was the information. She was between him and the crate in 2 steps, her hand on his wrist. Gentle pressure precisely applied to the specific nerve cluster that produced instant, overwhelming compliance without damage. He sat down, not because he wanted to, because his body left him no other option. I'm not here to arrest you, she said. She released his wrist and stepped back, gave him space. Space was a tool. I need information, and I need it in the next 10 minutes. After that, the people who are setting up at your front entrance are going to come through the door, and your options narrow significantly. She looked at him steadily. I'm the better option, Carver. I need you to understand that quickly. He was breathing fast, rubbing his wrist, looking at her with the specific expression of a man recalculating at speed. Who are you? Someone who's been inside the Mosul network since before you were part of it, she said. Someone who knows the architecture. Someone who, if you tell me where Voss is staging from, can make sure that when this resolves, the distinction between a primary operator and a peripheral contact is clearly documented. She paused. You know what that distinction means for sentencing? He stared at her. You're offering me a deal. I'm telling you the truth about your situation, she said. The deal is going to come from people with the authority to make it. What I'm offering is the difference between being the person who helped and the person who didn't. A long silence. She could hear him thinking the actual sound of it, the quality of his breathing changing as the calculation ran. She had 10 minutes. She counted internally. 9 minutes, 40 seconds. Voss moves Thursday, Carver said. His voice was low, the voice of a man crossing a line he had been standing at for a long time. He's been at a logistics hub outside Barstow, private facility registered to a shell company called Apex Distribution. He looked at his hands. The shipment goes out at 0400, air freight. If you don't intercept it before wheels up, destination. 3 hops. Final destination is Lagos, But the first transfer point is where the network reconnects to the European distribution chain. He looked up at her. You'd need to intercept at the first transfer, not Barstow. Barstow is a decoy load. The actual shipment is in the second vehicle. She absorbed this, the decoy load. Voss had rebuilt the network with exactly the kind of operational sophistication she would have expected from someone who had learned from the Mosul disruption. He had watched the original network fail, and he had built the new one around the specific vulnerabilities that had caused the failure. She pulled out her device and typed a rapid summary to Garrett. Barstow Facility Apex Distribution. Decoy load, second vehicle. 400 Thursday. First transfer point intercept. She hit send. Garrett's response came in 40 seconds. Confirm moving assets. Do you have the transfer point location? She looked at Carver. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned to his laptop, typed something, and turned the screen toward her. Coordinates, a location tag, a facility name. She photographed the screen and sent it without comment. Garrett assets en route. This is it, Carter. Good work. She put the device away. At the front of the unit, she heard voices. The other team at the main entrance. She had approximately 90 seconds. Stand up, she said to Carver. Move to the back door. Keep your hands visible. She looked at him. You made the right choice. He looked at her with something complicated in his face, not relief exactly, and not quite regret, but something in the space between them that was the specific feeling of a person who had been making wrong choices for long enough that making a right one felt foreign and strange and almost painful. I've been doing this for 4 years, he said quietly. He stopped, started again. I told myself it was just logistics, just moving things, that I wasn't. He couldn't finish it. You're going to have a long time to think about that, she said, not unkindly. Go. He went. She followed him out the back door and handed him to Caldwell's people, who had arrived at the utility corridor 45 seconds after she sent the coordinates. She didn't know when Caldwell had deployed them, probably before she left the facility, probably while they were discussing the vehicle. Caldwell always had people moving before the conversation finished. It was one of the things Maya respected most about her. Torres was standing beside the SUV with her arms crossed and her eyes on the back entrance of Unit 14 counting seconds. When Maya came through the door, she exhaled a long, controlled exhale that she had clearly been holding. 11 minutes, 40 seconds, she said. I had 20 left, Maya said. You said 12. I was being conservative. Torres looked at the Caldwell team walking Carver to their vehicle, then back at Maya. Is it done? She said. Maya thought about Voss in a logistics hub outside Barstow, moving a decoy load with a second vehicle at 400 Thursday, operating with the specific confidence of a man who had rebuilt a network carefully and believed he had built it right this time. She thought about the federal assets now moving toward the first transfer point, armed with the exact information that Carver had just given them. She thought about the intercepted communication, 11 words, 48 hours old, in the chain of events that had run from those 11 words through Hargrove's office and Carver's laptop to this moment. The network part is done, she said. The rest is going to take a while. Torres nodded. She understood that some things took a while. She had learned that in 3 months of having her work systematically undermined by people who should have been above it, she had learned patience the hard way, which was the only way it actually got learned. Can I ask you something? Torres said. Yes. When you came to this facility, the first morning, when Rourke dumped your logbook on the ground and you just walked away, she looked at Maya directly. Were you angry? Maya considered the question seriously. It deserved serious consideration. Yes, she said, but you didn't show it. Showing it would have given him something to work with, she said. Anger is information. You choose who you give it to. Torres thought about this. Is that something you learned or something you always knew? Learned, Maya said, the hard way, in a place much worse than this one. She looked at Torres steadily. You're going to learn it too. You're already most of the way there. Torres absorbed this. Then she said, my evaluation scores. Caldwell said they'd be corrected. They'll reflect your actual performance, which places you in the top quarter of your cohort. Maya paused. You earned every point. On your worst day and your worst evaluation with Rourke, standing at the base of the rope and doing his worst, you still nearly made the benchmark. That's not near good enough, Torres. That's exceptional under fire. Torres looked away. Her jaw was working. Not from distress, from the specific effort of someone receiving something they had been told repeatedly they didn't deserve, trying to let themselves believe it. I almost quit, she said. 2 weeks ago, I was going to put in the withdrawal request. What stopped you? A pause. I didn't want him to be right. She looked back at Maya. I didn't want Rourke to be right about me. Maya looked at her for a long moment. At this young woman who had held herself together under sustained, deliberate, systematic assault on her confidence, in her record, in her right to be exactly where she was and who had stayed, not because the situation was fair, but because she refused to let the unfairness define the outcome. He wasn't right about you, Maya said. He was never right about you. Torres nodded, one firm, clean nod, the nod of a person filing something permanently. They drove back to the facility in a silence that felt different from the silence on the way out. Heavier in some ways and lighter in others, the way silence felt when something had been resolved that had been open for a long time. At the facility gate, Torres said, "What happens to Rourke?" Maya kept her eyes on the road. Formal charges. The fabricated evaluations, the financial fraud. He was embedded in the assault in the dark. He's going to have a long time to think about the choices that got him there. A pause, Vaughn. His career is over. Good, Torres said. Then after a moment, is that wrong? That I think it's good? No, Maya said. It's honest. They went through this gate. The compound had changed again in the hour she had been gone. More vehicles, more movement, the specific choreography of an institutional response in progress. JAG officers moving with purpose. Administrative personnel with the slightly stunned expression of people watching the structure they worked inside being audited in real time. Caldwell was waiting near the administrative building. She looked at Maya and then at Torres with the sharp attention of a woman who had sent out one person and gotten back two and was deciding how she felt about that. Carver is talking, she said. I know, Maya said. Assets are moving on the Barstow location in the transfer point. Voss doesn't know we have the second vehicle information. Caldwell paused. How confident are you in Carver's accuracy? Confident, Maya said. He's been doing this for 4 years, and he's afraid, and he understood that cooperation was his only viable path. People in that position don't give false information. False information ends the cooperation arrangement. She paused. He was telling the truth. Caldwell nodded. Then she looked at Torres. Specialist Torres, your formal reinstatement documentation will be ready within the hour. Your corrected evaluation record will be filed by end of day. You are reinstated to full program, standing effective immediately. Torres stood straight. Yes, ma'am. Your actual performance scores, Caldwell continued, place you third in your cohort. I want you to know that number. Third, out of 31. She said it the way Caldwell said most things, without editorializing, simply as fact, because the fact was sufficient. Dismissed. Torres turned to go. Then she stopped and turned back and looked at Maya with the clear, direct gaze of someone who had something to say and was going to say it, regardless of whether it was the kind of thing people said. Thank you, she said. Not for the scores, for counting. Maya held her gaze. Go be third, she said. Torres walked away across the compound with her chin up and her stride even, and Maya watched her go and felt the thing that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite pride, but lived in the territory between them, steady and real and entirely earned. Caldwell waited until Torres was out of earshot. Then Garrett called while you were with Carver. The declassification process your record, it's been formally initiated. You'll need to be available for review interviews over the next several weeks. I'll be available, Maya said. It's going to be strange, Caldwell said, not unkindly, having your name back, officially, after this long. Maya looked at the compound around her, the place where she had arrived 7 days ago carrying a single duffel bag and a folder with a code she never wrote down, in which a man had decided immediately that she didn't belong. The place where a sergeant had dumped her logbook on the ground and laughed. The place where a young woman had nearly quit because the wrong people had told her for long enough that she wasn't enough. It's going to be a lot of things, Maya said. Strange is probably one of them. At 1600, she stood in the space where the morning formation had been held every day for the past week, and she sent her final transmission to the Oversight Division, the formal closeout report, the operational summary, the documentation package that completed the case file that would outlast everyone in it. She sent it and put her device away and stood in the quiet of the late afternoon desert and breathed. Her shoulder had settled from a burn to a tolerable ache. She had slept a combined total of 7 hours in the past 3 days. She had a transport back to the staging location, leaving in 40 minutes. And after that, a long drive to the city she liked, and after that, the coffee shop and the shelf of books in the small apartment that had been waiting for her through everything. And after that, Garrett's new briefing, the full Mosul picture, the work that remained. There was always work that remained. That was the nature of what she did not, the completion of problems, but the continuous disciplined engagement with them. One case at a time, one facility at a time, one person at a time. Rourke, Hargrove, Carver, Voss. The women whose files she had pulled from a locked cabinet and whose records were being corrected right now in offices she would never see by people following a trail she had built. Her transport came in 39 minutes. She was on it. In the air, somewhere over the desert, with the facility already invisible below them, Reeves, who had apparently decided he was flying back with her without asking anyone's permission, which was exactly the kind of decision Reeves made, leaned over from the adjacent seat and said, "You know, Garrett's new assignment is going to be worse than this one." "They're all worse than the last one," she said. "You're not wrong." He looked at her for a moment. "You good?" She thought about what good meant, about the specific inventory of the past 7 days, the logbook on the ground, and the man who laughed, and the 4 men in the dark, and the 11 seconds, and Carver's wrist, and Torres's nod, and Hargrove's slow, heavy reckoning, and Garrett's voice saying, "Welcome back." About the declassification process now formally initiated. About her name moving through official channels for the first time in years, reattaching itself to her history like a thing that had been separated and was finding its way back. About walking towards the dark because walking away had never been something she was built for. "Yes," she said. And she meant it in the full, complicated, entirely honest way that yes sometimes meant not that everything was simple, not that the cost hadn't been real, not that the road ahead was anything other than exactly what it had always been, but that she was here, that she was herself, that the record was being corrected and the debt was being paid and the work was continuing, and she was the one doing it with her name under her own identity as Maya Carter SEAL operator. "Ghost no longer." "Good," Reeves said, and went back to his notes. She looked out the window at the desert moving below them and let herself have 60 seconds. All 60 of them, every single one. And when the 60 seconds ended, she opened her folder, picked up her pen, and started writing the first page of what came next. She was done being erased. She was home, and she was just getting started.